Well, this movie exists. Oh, man.
I love the fuck out of cookies.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Cavanaugh's Corner. As always, I'm Andrew Cavanaugh. I want to say thank you for coming back to the channel. Today is going to be an interesting one. Well, if you haven't seen any of my other videos, I like to review Steven Seagal straight-to-video movies that come out. As they come out, I try to get to them as soon as I can. This is one that I'm reviewing today that came out, I want to say, a few weeks ago. Actually, it's not available on video yet, ironically. They put it on iTunes and Amazon and stuff first. They put it on digital first before they put it out on video. So I rented it, and oh man, why did I rent this movie? Oh God. Well, anyway, this movie is called Contract to Kill, and it's the latest direct-to-video thing from Steven Seagal. I'm not even really going to call this a movie. Calling this a movie would be too kind. And Contract to Kill is yet another collaboration with basically a director that does nothing other than Steven Seagal movies, Keone Waxman. Keone also did End of a Gun, which is the last review I did, where Seagal said that famous line,
I love the fuck out of cookies.
Yeah, he said, I love the fuck out of cookies. So today I'm going to use that clip for the rest of my life. I'm sorry, I have to. But one thing that I noticed right away when I started watching this movie is that Seagal looks completely bored out of his mind in this thing. He basically is sleepwalking through this movie. And that's scary because Seagal already looks bored out of his mind all the time anyway. In this, it looks like he may fall asleep at any moment. I'm not kidding. It's that bad. The plot is basically, the best way I can describe it is that it's a conspiracy theorist's like wet dream. The plot of the movie is that there are these terrorist cells that are secretly taking over like Mexican cartels so they can infiltrate America and set up like sleeper cells and all that jazz. It's really ridiculous. They're also trying to stop these, like an insider guy that's in with this terrorist group that also may have been working for the government at one point, and he crashed a plane, and that plane killed a lot of people, and the government tried to cover it up by saying he's somebody else. I mean, this movie's a fucking disaster. Like, I'm just gonna straight up say it. Like, this is one of the worst movies I have ever seen in a very long time, and I'm gonna harp on that for quite a while. Seagal in this movie, Seagal, if you're not familiar with a lot of his films, he always plays these ex-CIA, ex-Special Forces, ex-Navy SEAL. He's always an ex-something. In this movie, he's a freelance, like, gun-for-hire type guy, and he's been playing that part a lot lately. But in this movie, he's freelance CIA and DEA. So he's ex-CIA and DEA, but he's also a freelance guy that gets hired frequently by the government. And it makes totally no sense. But I guess he's been doing this for a long time because he has a whole team. He has his like ex-girlfriend, I guess ex-wife, I don't know, they don't really say. He hires her, and they have kind of like a back and forth kind of love interest thing, which really is atrocious. But you can tell the movie is very low budget. They tried to make this movie into like a Mission Impossible type movie. And Seagal is basically like our very overweight and slow Tom Cruise. And they try to get a lot of moments in this movie that are not action-oriented, but suspense-oriented. And Seagal cannot do suspense, and neither can the director of this movie. They try very hard to build up like a sense of like, ooh, suspense, like something's gonna happen. And it never works. Not once in this movie does it ever work. The special effects are really terrible in this. There's a lot of times when you can tell like they're in front of a green screen kind of thing, and like everybody's very blurry. It's really, really bad. The movie's worst offense, though, out of anything in it is that it's excruciatingly boring. And I totally understand now why Seagal looks so bored out of his mind, is because it's a boring movie. The movie, an action movie, it's in itself, the worst thing an action movie can be is boring. If you have a boring action movie, you have literally like made a movie for no reason. It's really, really not a good thing to do that. But they pulled it off in this one somehow. The plot of the movie, as I mentioned earlier, is very overly convoluted. And most of the movie is these characters that we don't give a shit about to begin with. We're never given a reason to care about them. But they spend the entire movie talking about what is currently going on. And that's really, really bad. Even the bad guys are constantly talking about what is happening at that moment. And that is really bad writing 101, etc., etc., etc. And everything they say, all their dialogue is so clearly empty. There is nobody in this movie that gives any sort of effort. The editing in this movie, I guess, is not awful, but it's another one of these movies, much like End of a Gun, where they flash back to scenes that literally just happened like mere minutes ago, and there's no need for that. Unless you have completely no short-term memory, there's no way you're going to forget about something that had happened 2 minutes prior. They're really doing this, and I know they're doing this to pad the running time of the movie again, because this movie is just barely over 80-something minutes, and they pad the running time by showing these scenes where, they're like, oh, we talked about this, so we're going to talk about this now, and we're going to show exactly what just happened, even though we're talking about what just happened on screen. And it just gets so old so quickly. It's such a shame. It's really, really such a shame. The action in this movie is extremely minimal. There are probably 2 or 3 like very short fight scenes. And I mean, really, Seagal barely does anything in this movie. He walks from scene to scene. He fights, I think, 2 or 3 people the entirety of the movie, and most of them is just him flipping these guys over or like punching them in the head. That's it. You get no action in this movie. From a movie that's supposed to be an action film, you get literally no action in this movie. Even less than End of a Gun, which I thought was, again, very minimal for a Seagal movie. This one here, it's even less, and it's so disappointing. Really, when you rent or buy a Steven Seagal movie, you're buying it to see this guy, beat the crap out of people, shoot people, whatever. You're buying it to see this guy do stuff. And in this movie, he's literally just going from scene to scene, talking. Very boring dialogue, and then nothing happens. And it's very, very disappointing. Like I mentioned earlier, the plot is basically just a disaster. It switches gears like 3 times. And it comes to a close with this finale that is so cliched, and it comes out of left field. But, of course, it has to spring Seagal back into action because he literally spends most of the movie just standing around and typing into this magical briefcase that can do all these different things. It's like basically this briefcase that Seagal carries around throughout the movie. It can change his voice on phone calls. It can record video and audio through walls. It is so ridiculous. It's so lazy. And this movie is really just the epitome of just terribly lazy writing. It's awful. I guess one of the few things that I can say about this movie is that Seagal actually speaks multiple languages in this movie. If he actually is speaking the language, I don't know if he's just, saying like gibberish and they're putting subtitles on it, but he does appear to speak multiple languages in this movie, which I guess is okay. And yes, he does wear his orange tinted sunglasses through the entirety of the film again. Overall, I mean, Contract to Kill is just such a headache of a movie. For an action movie, you get basically no action. It's really, really, really boring. The plot is a total disaster. The editing, it leaves a lot to be desired. The acting is just totally awful. This is the worst Steven Seagal movie I have seen in a very long time. At least some of his earlier direct-to-video movies, even though they were pretty bad, at least they had action scenes in it. This movie has literally nothing. They are 4-second action scenes and then it's over. And that is not a good thing. Steven Seagal is not a suspenseful type actor. He cannot carry that kind of movie. I hope they learn from this and never do another movie like this again with Seagal. It's a disaster. I'm giving it a 1 out of 5. It is the worst I've seen in a long time. I almost fell asleep in this movie, and the movie was barely over 80-something minutes long. Stay away from this movie. Do not rent it. Do not buy it. Even if you're a die-hard Steven Seagal fan, do not watch this movie. It is a god-awful disaster. That's all I have for the night. Thank you again for coming back to Cavanaugh's Corner. Hopefully Seagal's next movie will be a little more interesting, but to be honest with you, I'm not expecting much. Good night.
I love the fuck out of cookies.